All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Dojo Talks. I believe this is episode number 74. And today we are going to be ranking our top 10 greatest players. Okay, obviously these lists have been done before many times, but we've never done it on stream. And it's a very classic discussion, I think very important discussion when it comes to chess culture. Sometimes it leads to blood and violence, but if that's what happens, that's what happens. That's that's what we're here to do. So we're going to be ranking our top 10 greatest players. Now, there's a couple different ways to go about this list. You can think about it in terms of pure strength, but we all decided that a more interesting comparison would be kind of looking at players' strength relative compared to their peers and kind of overall greatness. So does that make sense? Is there anything you guys want to say on this topic before we get into it?
One quick note I could say is if it were just pure strength, like accuracy of computer moves or, how good their moves are, then you would get a ton of modern players who learned from the previous players, right? So we're trying not to just give you the top 6 players by rating from 2023 plus like 1 or 2 of the greatest champions from before. So I think the criteria we're using should basically equalize across time periods. Is that right, Jesse?
Yeah, and I think we'll both all have slightly different approaches to it, and we'll probably talk about it as we're introducing our top players.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm with David. I think ranking the top 10 strongest players of all time would be a different list. But also that would be something that is interesting, and I think we should do at some point. Because that list is also just depends. You could just look at the ratings, the highest ratings ever achieved, and that would give you a very close estimation already. But all right, let's get into it. I feel like I set this up, so let's start with Jesse for your 10th greatest player.
Okay, let me just say a little bit how I constructed this list. I think beyond my top 3, which are mostly, I think, are not going to change too much. The rest is a little bit hard for me to judge. And I just want to say a couple things about how I constructed this list. So I definitely am comparing the player to the time of the peer group that they were in and how they did, how dominant they were and for how long. Also, I want to acknowledge there's a definite subjective factor that I'll call the Woody Allen effect. So what I mean by that is if you have somebody who created great work like Woody Allen, but then like screws up in some monumental way, it's just hard to forget it. And so we just want to acknowledge that it's hard to forget it. So there is like a Woody Allen effect that a lot of these players have. So I just want to acknowledge that up front, that it's unavoidable.
All right, Jesse, explain a Woody Allen effect for millennials. Just re-explain that. Because
So
Kostya
Woody
doesn't
Allen
know
was-
who Woody Allen is.
No. I understood. Excuse me. I understood. I speak internet. I understood fine.
Yeah,
David, I thought would be the one that's like, what did Woody Allen do? He like makes.
Okay. Everybody understands. Continue.
All right. So then the other thing that I kind of in the back of my head is that when we compare players that were, let's just say, even at the beginning of my lifetime, it was largely a European, Eastern European game. And now it's a worldwide game. So there, I think in my head, there's a certain shift where if your peer group is a couple 100,000 players, then that's got to be different than a peer group with a couple million players. It's got to be. It's got to be. So that's also in the back of my head, also very hard to quantify and judge. So I just want to throw that out there. So I'm going to begin. One of the dumbest things David has ever said, and he said a couple, okay? He said that Morphy was a 1900 player. Morphy comes in at top 10. He could be earlier in the list. And of course, before the World Championship, but definitely dominant until 1850s, 1860s. And one thing that's very interesting about Morphy is, in terms of the world championship and defining the world championship, also understanding how great of a player he was, is that no one wanted to even, while he was in retirement, going insane, having the Woody Allen effect, no one wanted, in Europe, no one wanted to even talk about being called world champion until the guy was dead. Okay. So also, maybe actually I want to add one more thing about how I judge these things, or it's unavoidable, is, do I understand the contribution to the game that they made? And I talked a little bit about Morphy in the review I did of Reddy's Modern Ideas in Chess, but definitely let's talk about development and active pieces as a crucial contribution to the game of chess. All right, I'm handing it over to you.
I want to quickly, before I get into my people, say this, Jesse. I don't think I ever said that Morphy was 1900 strength. I would estimate him, not super scientifically, but I would estimate him at around like a FIDE 2100 level of play in the games that he played, not 1900. I don't think I ever said that. Now, it is true that FIDE 2000s and 2100s seem to be getting better and better. So maybe at some point I'll have to say that they've surpassed him. All right, that out of the way. Here's how I kind of picked my top 10. The number one criteria I looked for was the strength gap between the player and their contemporaries. That was my number one factor, like by how much are you better than the other players in your age? By 5 points, by 10 points? Can you beat them 2-1 or 2.5 to 1/2, etc.? Of course, moderating that a little bit, because in ancient times there was such a lack of competition. Now there's a lot of competition, and obviously it's harder to score the same kind of percentages. And if you look at the gap between, let's say, a 2100 and a 2000 versus a 2600 and 2700, which you would do across 130 years of chess history, you'll see that just the percentage you can rack up decreases for a similar skill gap. So that was my first criteria. My second is longevity. So it's like, if you've got two players that had a similar advantage over other players of their time, then the player who dominated for longer would be there. And then as sort of a tiebreaker, maybe contributions to chess comes in eventually. So if somebody really came up with new ideas, like for example, Sveshnikov would be a grandmaster who might rank higher than other grandmasters of his rating because he had some really exceptional contributions to the game. And then, it could be little things like, were they good at matches and at tournaments and et cetera, all around kind of stuff. So my number 10 with all of that is somebody who's proven to be a really not good human, I guess, but still a darn fine chess player. I mean, incredible chess player. Anatoly Karpov, number 10 for me.
So let me just say, actually, for the people listening, just to clarify, we're going to all give our top 10 list and then average out our rankings to see like who we kind of, as a consensus, think are the 10 greatest. My 10th is going to be...
Kostya, can I just say like one or two nice things about Karpov's play before we go on? Just
Sorry.
Really know the historical. Yeah, absolutely. So he was world champion. Which is one thing that pretty much, to be on my list, you had to be world champion. Because otherwise, what's the strength gap? It's against you, right? So he was world champion. He came between Fischer and Kasparov, and he edged out Korchnoi by not too much, so the gap wasn't huge in their matches. But Karpov was good for a really long period of time. He was number 2 to Kasparov for a very long time. So I also count that in terms of longevity and like the power that he had, right? Was that he was performing at a very high level for a long time, even though he wasn't still world champion, because another great player came along. I passed the ball.
No, by all means, I'm sure he's going to be on all of our lists. My number 10 is Morphy. I'm with Jesse on this one. First, let me say that My criteria was actually very similar to David's. I think David explained a kind of my thought process really well. For me, it's just all about strength compared to the peers, how long they were at the top, and then also contribution to the game, I think is pretty important. And Morphy was just incredibly good compared to those around him. And there were also good players around his time. Like Anderson was very good. Paulson was good. Like there were like really good players, but even despite that, he still managed to dominate them and score really, really well. So I would rank him higher based on just like how good he was compared to everyone else. But like, okay, it was unofficial times. It was like Wild Wild West. Like who knows what was happening back then. So with that in mind, I don't know. I couldn't really bring myself to rank him higher. But anyway, do you guys want to do a snake draft?
Sure. But let me just say one thing I like about you, Kostya. I like the fact that you've played through enough of Paulson's games to have an opinion about the dude. That's something I've always liked about you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think everyone should. I did a nice video for, I think, Lee Chess's YouTube channel on some of like the classic players, and Paulson was one of them. And the dude basically like invented a bunch of Sicilians that we know today. He was like the first to play the dragon, first to play like Nidor structures. Like, super good. Super good. Yeah, he should be number one. No. All right. My ninth pick is a pretty modern player. I almost forgot about him because he's technically, he's still very much playing. But I feel like he's already achieved so much that he has to be on this list. And that's Vishy Anand. I think you could even place him higher. Maybe I think that wouldn't be unreasonable. But he's already achieved a ton. He's won a bunch of world championships, like every single format. I think for me, the reason he's not even higher is I feel like he was never like a dominant, like clear number one player in the world for that long. Maybe he was for like a small stretch of time, but I feel like he was never just a very clear number one. But I feel like he's pretty much accomplished everything you could in chess. So
my number 9, Emmanuel Lasker. He may be the person who held the official chess championship title for the longest time of anyone. But what I would say is fairly well known to mitigate that is that he was hard to pin down for a match. So there was no regular match system. He got to pick who he played against. So he could dodge the most dangerous adversaries. So he extended that time period strategically off the board rather than on the board. Still, I mean, he was a world champion. He defeated his predecessor convincingly. And he was a very strong player for a long time. Even if at some point he was world champion and really maybe the 3rd best player in the world or something like that, that's still really good when you're 60, right? So, so I think he has, I think he played really well for a really long time. And
yeah, I feel like, okay, Lasker, I was looking into him a little bit, like doing research for this. And I think it is fair critique of him that he was dodging some players. But okay, he beat Steinitz, he beat Janowski in a match, he beat Schlechter, he beat Tarash like really convincingly. So he definitely beat a good chunk of players. But yeah, towards the later years, like wasn't playing Capablanca, wasn't playing Alekhine, like so yeah. But I feel like I don't know. He gets a lot of hate for that, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, super strong.
Yeah, I'm not trying to hate on him. I'm just saying, like, I'm not taking those years as at fully face value as like him being number one in the world for 30 years. He was maybe number one in the world for 15 years, which is still amazing, but more in line with some of the other players on this list.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, what do you think?
Well, as a segue, the person to whom Lasker gave the world championship. He didn't even say, he was just like, boss, you can have it. I've had it enough. You guys are talking about dodging. He was just like, boss, you can have it. You can have it. He just gave it to Capablanca. We'll talk a little bit more about Lasker later, but let's say that was 1921 where he gives it to Capablanca. And then 1924 kills everybody. Alekhine Capablanca wipes them as an old man.
Yeah.
And then even in the 30s, he's wiping people. So we're going to talk more about Lasker in a little bit. Capablanca, amazing talent. I could argue the most talented player ever in terms of raw talent. Definitely when we think about clean endgame play and planning and understanding where the pieces go, he's the dude you're going to talk about, and kind of set a style of play that people continue to emulate today. So, for example, I would say Wesley So is in this tradition of the Capablanca players. And also in Modern Ideas in Chess, there's kind of an interesting take that Reddy has, where if you think about the school of Morphy with development, that Capablanca is coming along and at a higher level is recognizing it's not just development for development's sake, but for a deeper sense of what's going on in the game, for abstract advantages that it might seem natural now, but I think for the players of the day, it was very unnatural to not develop a piece when it seemed like the obvious thing to do, and instead play for something a little bit deeper in the position that the players of this time didn't even understand what the guy was doing. So there he is, Capablanca. He could have been, obviously we have to mention World War I. We're going to talk about Alekhine later. So that kind of prevented him from doing a match with Lasker earlier. Arguably, he could have held on longer than, he was there from 21 to 27. But yeah, number 9 for sure.
Cool. You get
and
number
I get to go again.
Mhm.
Well, that gives us a nice segue. This is called the snake draft. We wrap around back and forth.
Yeah.
And I'm going for Alekhine. I cannot pronounce the guy's name right.
Don't do it.
Alekhine's a very interesting player, where, like Capablanca, really founded a new way of playing the game for initiative. And there were, of course, many attacking players in the 1800s. We usually call them the Romantic school, but Alekhine took it to a new level in terms of really delving deep into what we now think of as calculation and analysis. It might seem obvious, but even when you look at Modern Ideas in Chess, is going to talk about both Capablanca, Alekhine, and Lasker. One of the things that's obvious is the players of that day did not respect the value of deep calculation work. And so Alekhine was one of the first people to really bring that and marry it with this approach of initiative and attack that, later we're going to talk about we might not talk about here, but in terms of a school, we're going to think, and when you think about Tall and Kasparov and a little bit Fischer, all of this comes from this Alekhine strand of play from that period in the 20s and 30s. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, solid pick. All right, David.
Oh yeah, sorry. On me. My next one after Lasker. And I was even moving this while you guys were talking. Initially, I had him 1 or 2 spots higher, and I might move him again while we're doing the show. But I've got Steinitz here, Steinitz. One thing to know about him is he played both in the Romantic, Anderson Morphy style, and he invented his own sort of plotting style that he's famous for. He rose to be number 1 or number 2 in the world with the Romantic style, just depending on whether or not you count Morphy, who was technically still alive but retired, right? But Steinitz was either number 1 or number 2 to Morphy. And then he was again number 1 with the second style that he revealed. He was a top player in the world for a really long time. like he was playing world championship matches in his like 50s to 60s. So he has good longevity. You could mitigate his dominance by the fact that he didn't have a great record of like winning tournaments. So although he won matches against all the top players of his day, other than Morphy, who he didn't get to play with, in tournaments, he was not consistent, not in the way that, Karpov. Karpov's maybe somebody who won the most tournaments of any player. I don't know, but certainly won a ton of them, right?
He's up there, yeah.
But Steinitz, you'll see his record was really, really inconsistent. But he also had lots of contributions to chess, so that's a little bit of like a tiebreaker in his favor, I think, as well, that he contributed some pretty significant developments to chess. One of the top maybe 5 contributors to chess in history for development of the game, theory, and so forth.
Oh, well, I'll be honest, Steinitz is not on my list. I thought about him. I think he might be number 11 or 12 for me. Mm-hmm. For me, I feel like he was, he kind of suffered a bit from not having super strong competition at the time that he was like his strongest. Because I feel like, he didn't quite get a chance to like dominate maybe as some of the other players. But
there's a really weird thing, Kostya, which is that around his prime, he didn't play much for almost 10 years. Mm-hmm. And at that day and age, people's prime was often later than it is now, right? So, I mean, his prime years might have been when he was around 40, and from about age 40 to 49 or something like that, he was basically a chess journalist. Mm-hmm. And was like engaged in other activities and not playing very much. So he missed some of his best years. But when he came back in his 50s, he still won matches against like Chigorin and, pretty good competition.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. And like, I just want to say, I wanted to say this up top, but whenever we do these lists, there's always people that are like, I feel like we left out certain players or our lists are wrong. And that's fine. I mean, everyone can have their own opinions. It's just that sometimes people get like upset, when their lists don't match our lists. It's like, I hope everyone just like calms down and
I'm already a little upset.
All right. Well, all right. I'll go with my number 8 pick then. I'm going with another copy paste, going to be Capablanca for number 8 for me. I think Jesse already said all the important stuff. He's a great champion. He wasn't champion for a super long time, but I feel like he definitely deserves to be on this list. And especially like his style of play, I feel like was extremely influential. Like a lot of even modern grandmasters say they like grew up, studying his games specifically, and really taking a lot from his play. Kappa definitely a big pick here for me. Shall I do number 7?
You got it, buddy. That's the rules.
All right. Number 7, I'm going with Lasker. So I feel like Lasker was super strong, and I do think he won a ton of stuff, won a ton of matches. Did duck some guys, I think, later on, but I mean, just amazing champion and very, very influential player, like big fighter. They called him the psychologist. I think that was Kasparov's kind of reading of him, that like he would kind of play in different styles. And he also won a match against Marshall, I think, and really like dominated him. And Marshall, I mean, was very strong. So Lasker, I think, just a fantastic player. And I think honestly we should have more. We should know more about him. We should have more content about like his games and stuff, because I feel like we're missing a lot of culture actually in like the dojo and stuff. I feel like we need a lot more of their games in our program. Anyway,
and we've got somebody in chat who likes you, Kostya, but is upset that Anand is at number 9 and says Anand needs to be number 2 or number 3, from which we can easily deduce Ant Magical's national origins. In fact, perhaps even his hometown. You would almost have to be from Chennai to think that Anand is number 2 in history.
Ouch.
All right, my number 7.
Jeez.
My number 7 is Capablanca.
Thanks for taking the heat off of me.
Yeah. And yeah, as you said, Capablanca good. Jesse pointed out that he didn't win the world championship. It was given to him by Lasker, but he did play a match with Lasker that he won, right, Jesse? It was just that Lasker formally resigned the title to him and then insisted on playing him as challenger rather than as defending world champion.
It was a weird thing, man.
It was a weird thing. Lasker had some slightly weird points to him, probably off the board, right? And Capablanca had been trying to negotiate that match with him for about 14 years, something like that. So it was tricky. Yeah, I mean, I think he played really well, and I think his performance seemed really dominant for a while. And when Alyekh beat him, I think it was I think most people at the time considered it a big surprise, because Capablanca was so incredibly good. He was one of the first players that was kind of unbeatable, shall we say, or had that unbeatable aura, right? Because if you consider Steinitz versus Lasker or something like that, even if you were the better player would often lose a bunch of games, right? Steinitz Lasker was probably 10 wins for the winner for Lasker and 5 wins for Steinitz or something like that, And Capablanca went years without losing a game, right? Which was just a new thing, that you could have that kind of defensive technique to be impervious to losing. So that was kind of
right. He kind of famously got bored. He was like, all right, guys, that's enough. No one can beat me. It's he started suggesting chess variants, right? Because he was like, all right, we're done here.
Yeah. So he was fantastic. I put him at number 7. Just because there are even better players, right? I hear some people saying how could Kappa not be in the top 5? But it's the same reason for Anand or anybody else, right? There's so many good players. We've got at least 14, 15, 16, 17 world champions.
Yeah.
I always start from Gary being I always start from Gary being number 13, right? So you've got at least 17 world champions. You're going to have dominant players who are not in the top 5 of all time. That's just how it is.
Yeah. And let's be real, there are some weaker world champions. I'm sorry to say, I have a ton of respect for all these guys, but yeah, there are some world champions that were not around for very long. They just happened to win one time. But anyway,
maybe at the end of this, before we do the final tally, we can say which one we felt was the worst pick of our associates here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
You can do that segment, 7. Jesse, on both of us. I don't feel any need to yet.
So number 7, Steinitz. It was hard for me as a kid to understand or appreciate Steinitz because a lot of the play seemed foreign to me. But not only was this guy incredibly dominant, but it's also hard to appreciate, but it's probably the most influential player of all time. And just to put it in perspective, the guy grew up with the Romantics, could play chess like that, and then did this remarkable shift. And to paint a picture, the chess playing public was so pissed off at the way he shifted to a positional style of play. They were so infuriated that it was it's hard to imagine, but it was kind of rioting in the chess journalism of that time.
It was worse. It was worse than when Bob Dylan came out with an electric guitar.
Oh, I'm still pissed off about that, Bob, by the way.
That's so funny. I was just thinking about that.
No, it really was a huge shift. And then, David mentioned a lot of the ideas. So, and also just some of the things, actually, we're going to talk about Carlsen. Carlsen's such a weenie. These guys, Steinitz and Zukertort, they played till the brink of death dude. And like Zukertort basically dead at the end of the match. Like the World Championship match back then went on forever. It just went months and months and months. It was grueling. It was not some like pretty boy thing where you're done in a couple games.
No, one of Steinitz was very concerned as the first official world champion. He was very concerned with establishing the rules and regulations for this thing that had been passed down to us. And one of his principles was that no world championship match should be played for a maximum number of games. Like it has to be some kind of unlimited contest to a certain number of wins, or to the exhaustion and death of one of the participants. But
yeah, and we're talking really death. I mean, people are dying here. And the Labordine McDonald match, which I consider the first world championship match, that's also a match to the death. All right, now coming in number 6, we have Botvinnik.
Wow.
One of the things that's confusing to me about Botvinnik is I've never fully. There's a lot of players I feel like I understand. I'm not sure I ever understood Botvinnik fully, but the guy has to be on the list for being dominant in several decades and then dominant enough to reclaim the world championship at various points. I would say the contribution is not one of style, but of process. And when we think about the ChessDojo and the emphasis we have on going over our games and then publishing those games, is all about Botvinnik. I'll just say one of the great things about the dojo that's really happened is Botvinnik got to publish his games. There were journals that were like, yeah, sure, I'll publish your analysis, boss. But then most players couldn't. So it was kind of a dream that couldn't be attained. And now we're kind of doing it. We're doing Botvinnik's dream now. And what's interesting about it is by publishing it, with doing the analysis with the thought that eventually you're going to publish it, it forces you to be more clear. And I think that was so much of the guy's process that really helped him hang on forever. We're talking from the 1930s. He's playing in the 1970s. So this is this bridge figure that Botvinnik is, like Lasker, where you have multiple generations, right? From, let's say, guys plays Alekite and then coaches Kasparov. That's the kind of bridge that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Okay. David, who you got with?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, back to me. I was just seeing in chat, people were talking about whether being second best in a generation could still get someone onto our top 10 list or even into the top 5. Okay, for Capablanca, and then I have at number 6 the player who superseded him, Alexander Alyekhin. Yeah, once you're up to number 6, this is heady territory here. Alyekhin, I think the only player to die as world champion.
True.
But I think that has more to do with the World War than with him actively wanting to dodge his opponents. I think that if not for the World War, we could have had an Alyekhin Botvinnik match, which would have been fire. I mean, man, if you could pick one chess event that didn't happen to add it into chess history, that transition would have been awesome. That's really missing.
Okay, but come on, over Fischer Karpov? No way.
Well, Fischer Karpov, it wouldn't have been a transition, my friend.
No, but you said one chess event that never happened.
Yeah, no. Okay, versus Fischer Karpov, I'm still going to go Alyekhin Botvinnik. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Fine.
Yeah, Fischer Karpov, I'll give number 2. Number 2.
Fine. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. It's a close call. I think it's fair. It's a close call.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, it would have been great to have a couple Fischer Karpov matches, a couple, Alyekhin Botvinnik matches. If it took more than one, would have been great. Anyway, Alyekhin, Jesse said lots of great things about him, so I'll just more or less agree and say, he was world champion for a while. He was really strong, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay, cool. My 6th pick is exactly the same, Alekhine, or Alyokhin for the Russian speakers. Yeah, he was a really great champion. I feel like he made a ton of contributions. He also wrote quite a bit. I think he wrote more books than most world champions, and his books are really good. And so I just feel like he was just like a tremendous player, and yeah, just had like a ton of contributions, like in openings, in terms of like style, and then his books and like annotations as well. Another just like super influential player for a lot of modern grandmasters, I feel. So yeah, I think we kind of have them in pretty similar spots overall. Number 5 for me is gonna be Botvinnik, the father of the Soviet chess school. So yeah, Botvinnik, I mean, he's a great champion. Like you guys said, he had a ton of influence. He was a teacher of both Kasparov and Karpov. And I think also Kramnik attended his school. I don't know how much they interacted personally, but I mean, like what an influence. Basically, like, as Jesse said, like invented this like process of being like a professional player. He was the first to kind of set out a system, like how many tournaments a player should play over the course of the year, how to be a professional chess player, how to study, how to work on your game, how to analyze your games and all this stuff. So yeah, just super influential player. I would also say he gamed the system very well. He was like the only world champion to like lose multiple matches and then get the rematch and then win multiple times. But because of that, he was able to kind of stay at the top for quite a bit. So for me, yeah, his contribution, everything is just pretty massive.
I like what the two of you have said about Botvinnik, and it's helped me to, remember and reappreciate just how much he did contribute, right? Because there's contributions of like, here's an opening named after somebody, or, this person figured out that you can play with a fianchetto or whatever. But the idea that you approach it scientifically, that you work hard, that you plan your time, that you train, all that is also a big part of chess, which is now seen as a sport, right? And he took the first steps in that direction of making it a professional sport, I guess.
Yeah.
Or a lot of big ones.
Yeah. People. Yeah. Go ahead.
No. You can.
Oh, I was gonna say, people like to talk about how like, if these older players had like modern tools, like if Morphy had like ChessBase or something, like how good they would be. Yeah, if Botvinnik had some modern tools, if Botvinnik had like Chessable, oh my God, it would be over. It would be game over forever. He'd be 2,900. He'd be unstoppable monster. If he had like ChessBase, Stockfish, oh my God, it'd be yeah.
And anyway, if he could keep all his seconds and have them all using it too.
Right, his assistants.
He had the whole machinery of birds. Everybody working for him out there in the gulags on their little chess bases sending him stuff. Number 5, I don't know if this guy's going to show up on your guys' lists, but the current world champion, Magnus Carlsen, there's a pretty significant gap between him and the other best players of the last 10 years. Like, he's been 80-ish points ahead on average. Fairly
Jesse's
hard
dying.
to touch. You guys okay?
Jesse's dying right now.
Go ahead, boss.
Okay.
Go ahead. Just dig that hole a little deeper, buddy.
It's hard to think about anything other than your face. Anyway, I mean, I would say that he's been almost untouchable as number 1 for like a really long phase, but it bears mention that Caruana and Karyakin both drew matches against him. So he's been sort of dominant, but maybe not as dominant as he sometimes feels. He wins most tournaments he plays in. And in terms of pure strength, he's the best player of all time in that measure. But his gap is less than other players, but one has to also understand that he's facing way more players, right? Like, he's playing against like the largest pool of well-prepared players. So it's harder for him to create a huge gap. And I don't think it's very likely that in the future we'll see people with a bigger gap between number 1 and number 2. than Magnus now. Or
You're
it's
making a
fairly
great
unlikely.
case for him. What?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, dude.
You said
Great case.
it's very difficult to have a gap. And we'll likely never see another gap like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys could try to convince me to move one of my next 4 down a notch. We'll see. It sounds like you have him higher than me. Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I don't have anything bad to say about him. I think he's fantastic. He became #1 really young. He's like a prodigy. He's good at different time controls.
Let me ask you this. What does he still need to do for you to place him higher? Because obviously his career is still ongoing.
I mean, he would have to like win a couple world championship matches by 3 or 4 points instead of by 0 points.
Now, one thing I have to say about you, Dave, is sometimes you say things that are so dumb that they stick with me. They stick with me. Like when you said Morphe was 1900, of course I remember that it was 1900. How could I forget? How could I forget? No, how could I forget? Okay, let's leave it there. We'll talk about Carl.
We'll get back to it
more. We're going to talk about it more. All right.
Yeah.
So this next one is actually one of the hardest ones for me to place, and that is Lasker. I want to say a couple words about this. So 29 years. 29 years. It's totally stunning. And the reason it's hard, I think and I'll say that it was hard for his generation too, is that when I think of Lasker, it's very hard for me to say like, okay, what was his contribution? Very tough. Very hard for me to remember like, okay, that was the killer game the dude played. Very tough.
Yeah. I think it's 20. Oh no, you're right. Never mind.
So one of the things I love about chess is you have these numbers. So for example, if there were no numbers in chess, people wouldn't rate Lasker at all, but the numbers don't lie. And the fact that even after he was world champion and gave it up to Capablanca, he still seemed like the best in the world when you look at the numbers, right? So it's this really hard thing. And I want to stress one of the things that was so interesting about reading Modern Ideas in Chess is he's talking about Morphe through Alekhine, and he kind of doesn't even know what to say about Lasker, about what was the guy's contribution. So even for his generation, they didn't know what to say about the guy. And partly is like when I tried to read some of his works, like he wrote on other things too, very abstruse. He wrote a book called Kampf or The Struggle, one of the weirdest, poorest written books I've ever read in my life. And I think it was that inability to communicate his thought processes that we don't know much about this dude. Okay, so there it is. I don't know where to put him. And then number 4, I'm putting in Karpov. Okay, now with Karpov, we have to say that there's a lot of ugliness with Karpov. During his playing years, Hort made the great observation, Vladimir Hort, that the guy never really lost to any of the Soviet players when they played in tournaments. It was like, no, he would lose sometimes to some of the Western players, but he was never losing to the people of his country, right? So it was like this person of the state, somebody who celebrated the status quo and was rewarded for it, and then now he's having his own Woody Allen moment because he's in the Duma getting fallen down drunk. Guy, I might still be in the hospital. I haven't heard an update. So it doesn't look pretty. If Karpov had died in 1982, or 1994, when he wins Linares with a crushing score, it would look better, right? But then, of course, he played on, and then he was losing to chumps. So, in any case, we have to just bear that in mind. But during the guy's playing period, definitely developed a new style of play, was incredibly dominant throughout the 70s and 80s. So, I mean, you got to put him where he belongs.
I think I know for sure Jesse's remaining 3 picks.
Okay.
Not necessarily the order, but I think I know who's left for him.
Well, we are. It's very
obvious. I mean, it's not. Yeah.
We'll see. Before we started, I played a little game. I guessed who Jesse and Kostya's top 2 picks would be. So we'll see.
All right, boss. Who do you got? 4.
Yeah, it's your 4.
Yeah. Who's in front of Carlsen, bro?
Oh, on me. Yes. Very, very strong player, Gary Kasparov.
Oh, no.
World.
Jesse's dead.
What? What? You think it's crazy to put Kasparov ahead of Carlsen?
I'm just interested to see who's next, boss.
I think you put Kasparov ahead of Carlsen yourself.
I'm just going to see who's next, boss. I'm just going to see who's up ahead of these people. I just want to see it, boss.
All right. So I don't need to tell you why Kasparov's good?
I'm just dying to know who's 3-2.
All right.
I have a feeling it's going to be a 1900 level player.
I'll pass it to you, Kostya.
No, Kasparov is great. We obviously all have him on our lists. And I think most fans know about his contribution. So it's like, yeah, it's a little bit insulting to even try to like summarize. He's just like an amazing world champion. I think before Carlsen, most people would consider him kind of like an undisputed greatest player of all time, in my opinion. Okay, my number 4 is Karpov.
Wow.
I think that's kind of where he belongs. One interesting thing I recently heard was that Karpov was just basically like actually very dominant in 10 years from 1975 to 1985. So between like Fischer and Kasparov. I mean, he and Korchnoi were super, super strong and like crushing everyone. But I mean, he was beating Korchnoi every time. He was beating everyone else. And just actually, I wanted to ask you: were you trying to imply that like the Soviet players weren't allowed to lose to him?
Oh, I mean, whether it was allowed or just like implied that your mother would die, I don't know. I don't know. But the stats are very interesting. They just did not lose to him.
Yeah.
So it's just very suspicious.
No, it's interesting. I remember he was like Lubojevic or someone who was like, yeah, before Karpov became world champion, he was like I was beating him, and then after he became world champion, I never beat him again. It's just psychologically shut down. But no, I think Karpov as a player was tremendous. I feel like the fact that he hung in with Kasparov for so long, given how good Kasparov was, is also just like amazing. So yeah, I feel like he was a good champion. Arguably could be lower on this list in terms of his like overall contributions to the game. I'm not really sure. I could definitely see an argument for placing him lower. And in terms of like the Woody Allen effect, that stuff definitely I feel like is fair to be mentioned. That these lists are always about chess greatness, and some of these players might just be terrible people or end up doing bad things, and that's not great. That shouldn't be celebrated, but like their contributions to the game, it's kind of just like a different thing overall. On that note, my number 3 pick is going to be Fischer, and I think his contribution to the game is very well known, but obviously he rose to the top. He was at the top for a very short period of time, but I think he was considered number 1 for at least a couple of years, a very clear number 1, and obviously could have maybe stayed longer. I have him here. I mean, his contributions to the game, I think itself, are also pretty fantastic. A lot of the Soviet players like learned from Fischer in terms of how he approached the game, how he studied the opening and like did his prep, and how intense he was. He would just play every game out like to the bare kings. And of course, he made a lot of advancements just like in terms of chess tournaments and like conditions for players. His story is obviously incredible. I think everyone should learn as much about Fischer as they can. If they're fans of chess. Like this lone player from America, and like doesn't have a lot of people, a lot of family growing up, has to do it all himself, still gets to the top, has to fight this like Soviet machine. I mean, it's just an incredible thing that he was able to become champion. And objectively, I think if you would argue that he was definitely stronger than pretty much everyone of his time. Okay. I think that's it. Obviously not a great guy. Let me say one more thing. Not a great guy. I feel like he suffered from a lot of mental illness. He said a lot of terrible anti-Semitic stuff, misogynistic stuff, all kinds of stuff. But I think the dude was mentally ill. I think he had a lot of like bad influences. I think he had a very strange upbringing. I don't understand how anyone with like his life and his upbringing, like, it's just like, that's how he turned out. Like, so it's sad, it's unfortunate, but again, his contributions to the game are, of course, incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And I know that Jesse only has bad things to say about me, but I want to say that I appreciate that both Jesse and Kostya gave Karpov points for longevity for the years where he was number 2 to Kasparov. I agree with that insight. I know I put him lower than you guys, but I also had that same thought that like, the period during which he was really strong can be extended by that Kasparov period. And those world championship matches to Kasparov were close. I mean, he was losing in like game 24 of a 24 game match to Kasparov. I mean, that is intense. He was really good. All right, we're at number 3 now. And, a computer may only consider his play to be about 2100 level if it checks his caps score or something like that. But the gap between Paul Morphy and the other players of his age was tremendous, undeniable, absolute slaughter and massacre. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have the greatest longevity, but that's only my second criteria. If the gap is just too overwhelming, then, I'm going to have to give it to him anyway and say like he could have, continued dominating people for a while. And you can see, as Jesse referenced with his historical knowledge, that players in Europe, including primarily Steinitz was like the leader of this train of thought, were loath to talk about anyone being world champion until Morphy was dead. Or the idea of anyone being the number 1 player in the world until the guy was dead. Because it was like, whatever's happening with him is like, you're wondering if you could just pull him out of the sanatorium and he would wipe the floor with you blindfolded.
Boss, right? You said the guy's 1900 and now you're putting him at number 3.
2100.
Oh,
well, he's really good, Jesse, compared to his time. Compared to his time, he was dominant. We're not supposed to penalize him for the fact that he didn't have chess base.
I don't know.
No, it's a fair pick. I mean, no, honestly, I do think it's a fair pick. A lot of people say like Morphy is the greatest player of all time. Just unironically.
It's not a fair pick if you think the guy's 1900 bows. Come on. What are we talking about here?
No, I think Paulson was 1900, Jesse.
Let's give Morphy 2100. Let's bump him up. Let's bump him up to 2100.
Look, if you like Morphy, you should like stronger. The fact that I put him high. Like I put him higher than you did, dog. He crushed his opposition. He beat them by wide margins.
You're the dude who made the insane comment that he was 1900, and now we're at number 3. I'm just saying, boss. There's some stickiness there.
Okay, well, I've made my pick. I don't know how to justify it more. I mean,
all right.
I mean, would you agree that Morphy dominated the players of his age?
I think for anyone else to put Morphy at 3, it's ambitious, but to put him there and think he's in 1900, it's inconceivable. Okay, boss, I'm just gonna carry on here. All right, coming. By the way, my 3, my 4 to 10 is a little bit like my book list. My 4 to 10, if you ask me on a different day, I might shuffle it around. My top 3 hasn't really changed for a long time. And it's always evolving. I change my perspectives on it, but it stayed constant for a while. So at number 3, we have Fischer. And I think one thing I just want to say about the Woody Allen effect in terms of Fischer, it was a post by, the with the pandemic boom players, and then they discover that Fischer said some anti-Semitic stuff, and so I saw some stuff on Twitter trying to cancel the guy because it would have been his 80th birthday. I just want to say, great book to read is John Donaldson's Tome. Did a review on the channel of Fischer, and really, the guy had bizarre problems that related to his chess strengths. Like whatever, there's all kinds of neurologists want to argue about what kind of disease he had, but whatever disease he had, it helped his game when he was younger. Now, the thing that becomes weird when you obviously compare people is Fischer not only wasn't champion for that long, but really he didn't up his game until 69, 70. So it was really like that period in the 60s, he was a good player, but you couldn't say in the mid 60s that he was the best player in the world. There's just, you couldn't do it. So, but then you get to like when he goes into his cave of self-improvement, locks himself in his room and goes a little bit crazy, gets into some weird religious stuff, but is studying chess with a determination that it's hard to imagine, and all alone. By the way, growing up not being able to play the top players, just playing chumps mostly in around New York. Couldn't develop as fast as his counterparts in the Soviet Union. So it's a really amazing story. And then just those couple of years, I mean, you saw a level of chess arguably has never been repeated. I mean, it's just such a high level for those couple of years. So, okay, there it is. Fischer, number 2. You could also switch this around. You could switch around a little bit as Kasparov. Great player. Fantastic. You could argue as number 1. I wouldn't have any trouble if you put him at number 1. I got to have dinner with the dude, and I had the balls to say, I don't know, we were just talking best players. He looked at me, though, when I said that Fischer, Kasparov, and some other dude were top 3, and he was like, what, not me? Like that, Anyways, it was kind of
wow.
But an amazing guy, and the level of domination, through the 80s and then 90s, the whole 90s dominated by Kasparov. And not only that, but like a really fun and entertaining way of playing the game, right? And one of the amazing things about Kasparov is, despite the fact that he played so aggressively and seemingly was taking a lot of risks, the dude didn't lose that many games. It was really astonishing. You think about Tal, for example. Tal was losing to all kinds of chumps. And Kasparov was bringing it with the high-octane King's Indians and the Najdorfs, but he wasn't losing that many games. So could be number 1, but definitely up there. All right.
Yeah, I mean, in that, as far as not losing many games, he had that situation against Karpov where he was 1 loss away from losing that first world championship match in 1984. And he drew something like, 25 games in a row. So dude knew how to hold it down and draw and defend, right? Even though what he's famous for is dynamic, aggressive chess, revolutionizing opening prep to serve that end of, pressing the high octane and the most crazy openings. He was definitely hard to beat as well. I also have to say, Jesse, I'm going to keep saying nice things about you and see if you ever feel bad about saying mean things about me. I'm impressed that you were able to put him to give him your answer about the best chess players of all time in front of him like that. When I met Gary, I couldn't even say hi. The guy is so powerful. I mean, I couldn't even say hi. I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
He's
and
intimidating.
I couldn't say anything. So I'm impressed. Good on you. Number 2, best player of all greatest player of all time. As you guys have mentioned, I mean, like Fischer and Morphy, like Fischer doesn't have the greatest longevity, but when he was playing his best for a couple of years there, the gap was absolutely outrageous. I mean, just absolutely outrageous, clearly bigger than anyone below him on my list. right? He won 1 million games in a row. Actually, do you guys know that Steinitz at one point won 25 games in a row? I mean, the competition was less even, but that's a surprising streak that I turned up when I was doing my research, because Steinitz was somebody who could also lose 5 games in a row, which I don't think anyone else on my list here has ever lost 5 games in a row, probably. But anyway, Fischer's streak, when he wins those candidate matches 6-0, when he wins 1 million games in a row at the interzonal before that, it's just, I mean, yeah. And if you analyze the quality of his play with a computer, you would find that he was playing as well as Kasparov and Magnus would, 20, 30, 40 years later with the help of computers. Not that they cheated during their game, right? But that they had resources to train with, right? So relative to his time, it's even more insane that he could play at that level. So to me, that just blows it away, even without the full longevity. Obviously, I would have liked to see him play several more matches with Karpov.
Okay. Yeah. So my number 2 pick is, I think me and Jesse just have the same list at this point. It's Kasparov. So for me, it's like, look, Fischer was certainly like a super bright star, but the longevity, I just feel like, is so important, especially as I get older, and I've now been playing chess for many years. To be able to play chess at the highest level for as long as Kasparov did, and continue to dominate, because like I feel like his gap, if you count inflation, like his 2850, I mean, in the 90s, like that's remarkable. And to continue to like just work hard, because Kasparov's reputation was that he would just work all the time. He had so many interviews where, despite winning, he knew that he had to like continue analyzing his games, continue working on his openings, working on his chess. Because if he didn't do that, then someone would surpass him, sooner. Obviously, eventually someone would have to. But he stayed at the top for so long, and also just so revolutionary in terms of his contribution to the game. I mean, like he definitely, I feel like he was the successor to like the line. It was like Morphy, Alekhine, maybe Tal, and then Kasparov, just like taking the dynamic chess to just a whole nother level, just blowing people out of the water, checkmating people, like sacrificing pawns exchanges where people are just like confused. I mean the game where all of Karpov's pieces are like on the first rank. Karpov's like this amazing champion, and it's like, how could you do that to someone like that multiple times, even, Knight D3 game, Octopus. I mean, so yeah, I feel like Fischer definitely for, a brief period of time was much, much stronger than everyone else. But like, yeah, I really just respect like the amount of time that Kasparov stayed at the top. Okay, so you guys probably know who my number 1 pick is.
I guessed it wrong before the show, but if I'm guessing it wrong now, I will be really surprised.
You thought I would take Kasparov before the show?
I predicted that your top 3, Kostya, would be Kasparov, Fischer, Magnus.
Oh, in that order.
That's what I wrote down. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
But I may be not completely off in that you and Jesse may think that the 3 are sort of close and sort of a tier above others, but I definitely got the order completely wrong for both of you.
Gotcha. Yeah, for me, it's like these 3 definitely feel like the three goats. I don't know. I think you could make an argument for Karpov as well, but yeah, for me, it's definitely these 3. And when it comes to Magnus, honestly, okay, I'll be honest, I thought Jesse was gonna go Kasparov and be very stubborn about it. I'm sorry, Jesse. And I thought David would have already acquiesced that Carlsen is the GOAT. So I was definitely way off on that one. And now I'm actually...
now we have no idea what David's going to say.
I have a guess. And
like he's going to say Stockfish, or I don't know what dude is going to say.
I hope
I stuck to humans. That was the brief.
But let me say just one thing about Carlsen. For me, I think a lot of people have both Carlsen and Kasparov as their number 1, kind of like interchangeable. And basically the reason I went with Carlsen simply just because like he's still playing, he's still number 1, and it's already kind of a 50-50 for a lot of people between the two. And clearly it's just going to be continuing to trend in Carlsen's favor. Like he's not just retiring today. Like he's going to continue to be number one, probably for a couple of years. Who knows how long? He's also, I think, very, very dominant in like rapid and blitz. I feel like in Kasparov's time, there wasn't like as many of these events, but Carlsen just shows very, very clear dominance in the fast time controls as well, which I think is amazing. And yeah, he won so many world championships. You know, he got bored of them. I don't know how many times you guys want to see him, you know, beat up on Nepo, but like, yeah, I understand. I understand why he quit at the time that he did. And I feel like he's still very motivated to keep playing and continuing to be number one. So yeah, for me, it's like, okay, it's already a 50-50 toss up, but the fact that he keeps going, it's like every day, it just, I think, kind of adds to his favor. So yeah, for me, I think it's time to call it. Carlsen, number one.
Okay. Kostya, do you have a guess what David's going to say here? You have a guess spot?
I would guess either, I think Greco would be my first pick based on the list that David has been building. Greco or Philidor would be my guess. One of the earlier guys that were just like the first competent player in a sea of like total beginners.
All right, dude. Because I have no idea. All right, David.
You both put Magnus and Kasparov in a different order than me, maybe. And I just want to say one thing to the point you just made, Kostya. Like, I'm just trying to make an argument, perfectly friendly, no insult to your pick or anything like that. But I feel like Kasparov was number one at age 40 when he retired, right? Is that about right? He retired in 2004. He was born in 63. So he was either 41 or 40 and 11 months or so when Linares was played, right? So I feel like for Magnus to equal him in longevity, and I know Magnus hasn't retired yet, so you're saying, you know, you can see the argument's only going to keep getting in favor of Magnus. I feel like Magnus would need another 8 years as undisputed number one to match what Kasparov did. I don't know. That's a thought I have there. Unless you think unless you think the gap between him and his opposition is bigger than the gap between Kasparov and like Shirov and Salov, etc.
No, I do, because a few of Kasparov's years, it was like, you know, Karpov was a very clear number two, so it wasn't like he was just a totally dominant player. Carlsen, I don't think, has ever had a clear rival. There's just been several players that were number two for extended periods of time, like Caruana, Aronian, and so on, but he's never had like a Karpov that just continues to, you know, beat everyone else and battle them. So yeah, I do think Carlsen's gap is bigger than Kasparov's gap. And also, it's really important that I think it's much harder now. I think Carlsen is going up against more elite players than Kasparov. Kasparov obviously went up against some incredible giants, but I think Carlsen has gone up against even more.
So, David, there's a poll going on. We're just mystified, boss. We're just mystified about who you could. I mean, your weird opinions get so weird. Like, I would just say, David's opinion, he's got some weird ones, but there's a lot of ways in which he acts like a normal person. And then you see glimpses like this, and you're like, what? You know? So, anyways, the whole internet's asking right now. They're saying Tall and Greco, dude, Philidor. I
think people give David too much hate on the. I mean, they're just opinions. It's not like a question of moral character. Okay.
There's times when your opinion could be so wrong that we got to question the moral fiber behind things here.
But they're well-informed opinions. I mean, you also think that Fischer, Morphy, and Kasparov and Carlsen were dominant players. What I mean, well, I don't know what's so weird or insane about it.
Wasn't in 1900, but all right, boss. I'm just dying to see it. Let's see.
I thought about it a while, and I think Kasparov so far has a better case than Carlsen. But I don't think you guys are weird because you put it in the other order. You know,
okay, boss. Well, let's just go
just
ahead.
An opinion.
Go ahead and let her rip, boss.
All right. This player here was a candidate for the world championship 8 times, as well as being a world champion. He competed for the world championship at age 64. He was still playing in candidates matches. And it was only because of some favoritism to Botvinnik that he didn't totally dominate the 50s and 60s. So the number one greatest player of all time is Andre Danikin Philidor, actually.
Oh,
And
so true.
I was just seeing if Jesse would hate me or not. If I put Smyslov there, if that would be pardonable. So the gap.
Oh, so I guessed it. I guessed it.
You did it, Kostya. Bravo.
Nice.
The gap between Philidor and his contemporaries, he was the number one player in the world for 40 years. He absolutely crushed his adversaries. In fact, he played most of his matches at pawn odds, like against the other top players. Now, obviously, it's harder now. There's much more competition, right? It's hard to estimate across time, but he could really, really crush the players of his age quite convincingly. And I have a little tidbit for you. I have a little tidbit for you. You guys want to see a little tidbit of Philidor?
I don't think we have a choice, boss. Go ahead.
No, Philidor is cool. Very influential.
Yeah, here, I'm going to send it to you in Discord because I'm not hosting it. But there's a game. And Kostya, if you want to try and grab that and bring it up. Okay. And while you do, I will add that, he had a huge strength gap, huge longevity, and huge contributions to chess, right? Like his idea that the pawn structure is critical, which obviously there were errors in his theory. Steinitz's theory had errors too, and there have been improvements made to every theory. But his contributions to chess are also in the top, 4 or 5 players in history, probably. I was playing through some of his games yesterday, and I definitely found some gaps. Like there's a player, like I would say Steinitz is a player who didn't always execute as well as his strategy to some extent. So you could contribute a lot, but not necessarily have, the greatest tactical skills or execution every time. But so I would, but I think, he had the skills to play. There's not a lot of records of his games from back then, so it's not easy to evaluate. But this game here that I came up with is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I have the game up now, David.
Okay, so can you just go? We'll just look at one move, okay? Mm-hmm. Just go to move 18 after white plays c4.
Rook f3, c4.
Yeah, and now just look at the move that he plays here, and he even explains it. You guys have to remember, this is in 1700 that he explains this move. And Kostya, I think you can probably read the annotations yourself there if you want. But he explains his next move here, right? Why he plays e4 in this position. Yeah.
That's baller. No, I'm with you. I think in terms of like pure contributions, and also if you took the metric of like who was ahead of their time by like the number of years, Philidor is up there for sure. Because this is, and he had a lot of this stuff that was just like, just like idea, and it's like positional sacrifice. That's the point takes, and then d4.
Yeah.
And
this is a sealer sweeper, right? He's opening up his bishop and knight, blocking in white's bishop and knight. He points out also that if you play d4 after knight e4, your e-pawn is worthless and your bishop is bad.
Yeah.
Right? No, so it's like, foundations of straight to Nimzovich from this guy, right? And he e4, d-e4, d4, and then he plays knight e5 and the d-pawn's dangerous. And he even calculates correctly this game. I think he was particularly inspired this game. There's some good calculation towards the end. It's just fantastic. It's just way, way ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. It's like, okay, his contribution is amazing and just like way ahead of his time. For me, it's just like, okay, strength relative compared to peers. The guy didn't have a lot of peers. Most of his games are against NN. And unfortunate that's, So for me, I don't know, maybe we could have, for me, these guys are just kind of disqualified just because it's not their fault, but they just weren't, I just don't consider that part of like.
Yeah. Fair enough. It's hard to evaluate without like a really good game record, right? Like his strongest opponent that he took over from was Deschapelles, who was his own teacher before him, who he eventually surpassed. And we don't have the games of the Morphy Deschapelles match where he beat him and took over as number one, so it would be great to be able to actually see the games of that match. And I know that, he didn't have the greatest competition, but he did travel around the world and beat all the best players. That we do know from the historical record. So, it would be good to have that. I looked at games from Le Bourdonnais and, Greco and Anderson and so forth. But there was not as much dominance from those players.
Oh,
Jesse, did you want to give your top pick?
I'm going to have to. I'm just going to say it was obviously ridiculous. Okay. Actually, we'll do maybe this. I'll just give my two critiques. That was this terrible. There were some terrible things in David's list, but that last one was abysmal. And, if you want to take someone from that era, you got to say Le Bourdonnais was more dominant than Philidor in his time. So even there, it's like, oh my gosh, what are we talking about? And then number one, I can't even speak to it. Now, with Carlsen, let's just say that couple things. Carlsen, buddy, if you're listening to this show, all right, you're killing me, boss. This whole thing where you gave up the world championship, it's killing your legacy, boss. It is killing your legacy. Now, clearly the dude was there's nobody even close to him for so long. So you have to say that the dude is on the top. I hope he comes back. I hope he comes out of this weird shell that the guy's in, lost his mind. Hopefully he doesn't go down the Fisher Road. I don't know what's going on with him. In any case, I'm worried for the guy. Also, this new trend where he's like, oh, I'm tired of real chess. I want to play blitz chess. It's a problem for the chess world, and also for Carlsen. It suggests that he doesn't have the juice anymore. Like Steinitz playing on to Carlsen, think about Steinitz, boss. Think about matches to the death when you're 50 years old. Okay? None of this chump stuff where you're in the best prime of your life and you're like, oh, I'm too tired. No, boss. Think about these people that you're up against. And because this is who you're up against, this list, boss. You got weight of history behind you.
But you already put him at number one, so what more does he need to do?
I'm just saying.
He has to convince you, David.
There's some issues. And then with Kostya, I got to say, no way is it not number 9. Forget about it. The guy's a great player, but in his prime, he wasn't even number 1 when he was playing the best chess of his life. Come on. In any case, there it is. Those are my critiques.
Wow.
Yeah. Wait, who did he critique you for, Kostya?
For Anand. That's fine. I mean, I don't care.
Okay.
I think it's fair. I feel bad for not having him higher, actually. I think he's amazing champion. Just because he's been around for so long and he's won in so many different formats. But anyway.
Is it not slightly odd that Jesse's number 1 is the only person that he had bad things to say about? Everybody else, he's like, they were so great. They were so great. Then he gets to number 1 and he's like, dude, you can't compete. Look at the people on this list that I just put you ahead of.
I said bad things about Karpov, Lasker, Botvinnik, the whole down the list.
Only off the board.
Well, yeah, that is kind of funny. But I mean, no, I think Jesse's just mad that Carlsen isn't achieving even more.
Sure.
Look, guys, obviously we've all blundered a lot in today's stream. I think no one will disagree with that. People asking, what about Tal? Tal, he wasn't at the top for that long. For me, I do think he's an incredible player and definitely contributed a ton to the game. I don't think he's way far off the list, but there's only 10 slots, and that means we could only put 10 players. So that's how it goes.
I've got another 8 honorable mentions, so I can say that Tal came in around 13th or 14th for me, for those who want to know. And Botvinnik is the player that you two put the highest that I don't have on my list, and he was my 11th. He was my first honorable mention. So.
Well, I think we should do another show where we just talk chess strength, because I think that would be a really interesting show. Because I think it's it would just be kind of cool to compare. I think a lot of modern players would destroy some of the players on this list, and I think that's what we're talking about. Doesn't mean that they're that these aren't great players, but I just think it would be cool to discuss. So.
All right, let's do the math. Let's figure out who the ChessDojo top
Right.
players of all time are.
Right. We got to tally up the rankings.
Oh my God, this is I don't and the way we got the scoring, maybe Philidor will even make the top 10, so our embarrassment becomes eternal. So
I don't think so. I think we had enough overlap that we should be okay. Let me
I
see
don't know.
what the
You get a
typo
lot of
is.
points for a top pick, though.
Yeah, true. We're giving what are we giving? 10 points, right, for number one pick. Now for me, the player that I was missing is Steinitz, and yeah, he was the one I was kind of thinking about instead of Morphy. I think he was very close to make my list.
I can't understand how you guys both put Morphy at number 10. That's like, I guess, what I would be most surprised about your lists. I mean, everybody you have on your top 10 list makes sense. It just feels like Morphy should be at least a couple steps higher.
Dude, you're the one who got inside my head because you said he was 1900. You know? What are you talking about?
Yeah, for me, I think he also suffered a bit from playing during the unofficial era, so it was hard for me to place him higher ahead of like established champions. And like a lot of the games from that era like aren't even accurate, you know. Like who knows like what actually happened.
Well, so we called Philidor from the top 10. That's great, dude. That's great. I want to just say while he's doing that, the other thing with Carlsen, I think is very important to understand is, and I mentioned this in my criteria at the beginning, is that when you think about Fischer and Kasparov, the pool of players that they are competing against are basically European, Western European, and Eastern European. Those are the people that they are playing against. It's a much smaller pool than the pool of players that Carlsen is playing against. We now have China. We now have India. We have, it's just so much bigger. And what that means is the amount of talent that's has come into the game and is presently coming into the game is just much higher, just in terms of sheer numbers. And even now with the internet booming, with the chess internet boom that's going on, we're getting a new influx of people. And even if they're just start off playing Blitz online as kids or whatever, you have the opportunity to find the talent, or rather the talent has an opportunity to find itself. So that's one of the reasons too, that Carlsen and then the people after him have to be seen at a higher level, where Steinitz is, great, fantastic player, Lasker too, but the number of people that they're playing against is so much smaller. At that time, for example, especially Steinitz, at the time of Steinitz playing, Russia hasn't even begun to develop as a chess nation. So it really is just Western Europe at that time.
Okay. I'm about to reveal our final rankings for everyone to see. And you guys are ready. We didn't talk tiebreakers. I don't know how we're doing a big tiebreaker here, but there's our list. I'll read it out for everyone that's listening. In number 10, with 9 total points, we have Capablanca. In 9th place with 10 points coming from one source, we have Philidor. Number 8, we have also with 10 points, Morphy. Number 7, Botvinnik. Number 6, Lasker. Number 5, Alekhine. Number 4, Karpov. Number 3 and number 2 are both Kasparov and Fischer tied with 25 points. So they're tied for second. And then Carlsen just narrowly edges them out with a first place finish, 26 total points for Magnus. Wow. So there you have it, folks. A very clear top 3, even despite our differences.
Yeah, wow, they really came in a pack, those 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if that's not scientific, I don't know what is. Steinitz, the honorable mention with 7 points just at the end there.
And honestly, if we just take out the absurdity of Philidor at number 9, just like pretend that wasn't there, it's a pretty good list. Dude. That's a pretty good list.
No, it's just a question of if he's even. It's just tough. It's just tough to count him in. These lists are always very hard.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make a list from like 1900 to the modern day, then your list makes sense. And it's difficult to include people from pre-1900 with any degree of accuracy. So, I mean, I think that you guys ranked Morphy and Philidor very low, and you think I ranked him very high, but I recognize that it's hard to say where those two players should fall compared to modern day players. I think there's enough of a record on Morphy that if you really wanted to, you could include him. But
yeah, we should have started it with Morphy. That we should have done that.
Yeah, I mean, if so, you can bump everybody up for me and put and Botvinnik would be in my 10th spot and he'd get one more point and tie with Lasker. But
yeah, I think it's more fun this way. All right, folks, that's the immortal list, the top 10 greatest players. There you have it. Yeah, that's gonna do it. Thanks for tuning in.